Hello. One of the best things about being a curator, I've now realised, is that however shaky your knowledge, you probably know considerably more than the people that you're speaking to. And I'm quite aware that today I'm coming to you as a 20th century maritime historian, talking to a room full of Shakespeareans about Shakespeare. So please forgive me for what might seem quite rudimentary to you. That's probably been quite hard won by me quite recently. So I'm here to talk to you today, as Peter mentioned, about our display, the Tempest in the Thames, in which we are featuring Dulwich College's folio and a few other artefacts in a new world, really. So obviously, it's not hard to find references to the seas across William Shakespeare's plays. I've selected the three quotes here precisely because they're very well known. But his works are littered with oceanic imagery, with watery metaphor, with ocean passage, with trading ventures, and famously with shipwreck. This nautical engagement is not hidden from view, and yet the connections between Shakespeare's works and the seas and oceans are really only recently making the leap from academia into general consciousness. It's in recognition of this connection that we have chosen to display a copy of the First Folio in the National Maritime Museum on this anniversary year, but we have specifically chosen to display it in our Maritime London Gallery. We want to remind visitors that London really was the epicentre of the early modern maritime world. And it was also a rich cultural hub, obviously home to poets and playwrights such as Shakespeare. Okay. We believe William Shakespeare, as you will all know, arrived in London in around the 1580s, at a time when England had moved from a profoundly insular state, concerned primarily with domestic and European matters, to one which was increasingly flexing its maritime muscle. Over the 16th century, the people of the British Isles had learned how to utilise the seas and oceans to their advantage, establishing a global network of trade, interfering with Spanish and Portuguese maritime activity, and paving the way to eventual colonisation and settlement. By 1600, this oceanic turn led to Elizabeth I's new royal charter, granting, and bear with me, this is a mouthful, the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies a monopoly on English trade with Asia, marking the foundation of the East India Company. In 1606, the Virginia Companies of London and Plymouth were similarly established by James I, indicating a turn towards a more expansionist policy, which would ultimately see colonies established in mainland America, one which would result in the often violent disruption and dislocation of indigenous communities there. Of course, not everyone had direct experience of seafaring, but the lives of people across England were impacted in a more indirect manner, as new trades emerged in dockyards, new goods emerged for sale, and also as maritime sort of figures, famous sea captains began to be popularised in woodcuts and ballads. As I mentioned earlier, London was the epicentre of early modern English shipping from around 1550 onwards, the river teeming with all manner of fishing and trading vessels. Dockyards were also established across the city, and as early as 1562, Deptford Dockyard employed 62 shipwrights, 24 carpenters, 15 watermen, and many other workers in similar trades. At the same time, the neighbourhoods around Lime Street became known as notable for the miscellany of navigational equipment that they had for sale. As knowledge of navigation and other maritime practices evolved, it began also to be printed in books and so disseminated in a professional literature of nautical know-how. Texts such as, and apologies again for pronunciation, Lucas Janszoon Wagner's Mariner's Mirror, which was published in English in 1588, and a page of which is included here, provided comprehensive instructions, detailed charts, and tables of data for navigation between European ports. While on the one hand, the people of early modern England were increasingly making use of the seas and oceans for their own gain, often financial gain, they were also profoundly aware of the danger inherent in ocean travel. This ambivalence was also wrapped up in theological concepts that determined terrestrial spaces as human and oceanic and celestial spaces as divine. Psalm 107 includes the lines, "They that go down to the sea in ships and occupy their business in great waters, these men see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep." These wonders might encompass sights of extraordinary beauty, but also the awesome power of waves and tempests that could dash a ship to pieces. Ultimately, sailors went to sea at God's will, and what happened once they were on it was entirely in his hands. It's not surprising, given this context, that Jonah and the whale was one of the most popular stories of the biblical seas during the 1600s, and it was often depicted in paintings, such as this one in our collection, by Carlo Antonio Tavella, but also in maps and invoked in much literature. Taking all this in mind, it's useful to remind ourselves, as Steve Mentz wrote in 2015, this sea change in early modern oceanic meaning from divine mystery to primal reality reminds us that even the trackless sea has a history. We recognise Shakespeare's ocean, but its meanings are not exactly ours. While this period undoubtedly saw a shift towards more rational conceptions of natural phenomena, the process was slow and irregular and far from a clean break, as is reflected across Shakespeare's works. This is where it's going to be talking to people who know significantly more. I'm going to flag it up now. In his writing, Shakespeare consistently demonstrates substantial interest in the sea and contemporary maritime culture. His plays pick up on many current developments, including imperial expansion, burgeoning trade opportunities, and also the constant threat to life on the waves. He variously depicts the sea as a pathway to trade and even diplomatic connection, as in Antony and Cleopatra, but also as a divine and perilous element, as in the Tempest and Twelfth Night. He was evidently aware of oceanic and geographic developments, as evidenced in Maria's famous line from Twelfth Night, in which he refers to the new map with the augmentation of the Indies. This map is almost certainly the Hydrographae Descriptio of the mathematician Edward Wright, which was published in London in 1599. It was a world map specifically produced for navigation at sea, and the first successful planispheric rendering of the Mercator projection. Likewise, the Tempest is roundly believed to take as its source the 1609 shipwreck of the Sea Venture on Bermuda, and the coin here in our collection was minted in 1959 to mark the 350th anniversary of that event. Not only is Shakespeare's awareness of oceanic events clear, but the accuracy of his technical seafaring language, as in the oft-cited opening of the Tempest, led scholar A.F. Falconer to argue that he must have gone to sea himself. As we know, this is almost certainly untrue. Shakespeare wrote with uncanny dexterity on subjects from shoemaking to forestry and jousting, and it's far more likely, given the maritime nature of the city in which he lived and worked, that he picked up the language of the sea from those he encountered in London. Shakespeare uses the word sea more than 200 times across his works, alongside regular repetition of terms such as ocean, brook, tide, and bay. The sea is a wilderness. It is rude and rough, or even vexed, but it's also a metaphor for deep and boundless love, as in Romeo and Juliet. He frequently employs other nautical terms, and the one I'm going to draw attention to today is sounding and fathoming. Both words refer to a means of measuring depth, which in the early modern era would have involved a lead and a line, shown here. So the lead is thrown overboard, and then the length of rope that it takes to hit the ocean floor is measured, and you can work out in fathoms exactly how deep you are, and then use charts to work out your position along the coast. Shakespeare, however, uses the terms in the metaphorical sense, meaning to gauge someone's true emotional state. Famously in Hamlet, Guildenstern says of the prince's condition, "Nor do we find him forward to be sounded, but with a crafty madness keeps aloof, when we would bring him on to some confession of his true state." It's these ideas that we are trying to discuss and prompt in our new display, the Tempest in the Thames. It's very small but nicely formed, I would say. And it's open until the 24th of September, so please do come and visit us. The exhibit brings together 4 objects, including the Dulwich Folio, which is in 2 volumes. The first, the Comedies, is open to the Tempest and the titular storm. The second volume, the Histories, is open to Richard III, Act 1, Scene 4, whereby Clarence relays his dream, in which he falls overboard and descends to the seabed, sight of 1,000 fearful wrecks, men that fishes gnawed upon, but also wedges of gold, inestimable stones, unvalued jewels. This scene perfectly demonstrates the early modern ambivalence towards the seas, at once symbolic of wealth and prosperity, but also a site of terror and momentous danger. We've also included a petition by the Thames waterman to the Lord High Admiral, admonishing him to reopen the Rose Theatre. It's believed to have been written around 1590, when the theatre was likely closed due to an outbreak of plague. The watermen expound their plight, describing the significant income lost due to the decline in theatregoers needing transportation to and from plays. It seemed a pertinent object, obviously, given the last few years. Finally, and perhaps a little more whimsically, we did include the manuscript for The Telltale, a comedy by an unknown author written in the 17th century. We hope to remind visitors that Shakespeare's plays did not emerge with the First Folio, but would have started their life as handwritten texts like that. There is a final reason to stage this display at the National Maritime Museum in 2023. Studies show that in modern Britain, the seas and oceans are largely absent from the collective consciousness, a phenomenon known as sea blindness. This might not be a problem if it were not for the current plight of our oceans, of which we are all aware. We do need to find a way to renew interest in the blue part of our planet, create a sense of ocean citizenship, whereby the seas and oceans may once again find a ready place in our lives, even as we spend less and less time upon them. If this is not achieved through personal experience, then it can be perhaps through cultural encounter. We need essentially to re-mythologize the seas, renew the sense of mystery and excitement once associated with them, and promoting a cultural history of the oceans. Using writers such as Shakespeare is one way to do this. If you are interested to hear more about Shakespeare and the sea and the work we're doing at Greenwich, we do have a blog series that is regularly updated on our website, and we are running a conference on the 8th and 9th of September this year, which you can join in person or online on Shakespeare and the Sea, with keynote speakers Professor Emma Smith and Professor Steve Mentz. So keep an eye on our website and that will be updated on there. But thank you very much.
Yep, 3 minutes for questions. So anyone in the room would like to ask Lucy or Peter something about their presentation?
It's just interested in how your audiences have responded, because obviously I would imagine the demographic quite focused on their area of interest. How have they responded to bringing Shakespeare into that?
Yeah, it's something we're kind of looking into, because we get a lot of people now coming to the museum and saying, where's the folio? But what we're not sure about is how many of those are our traditional visitors who are finding a new artefact and how many of them have come specifically to see it. So the answer is I don't know. But it's something that quite a few of us are exploring now about the cultural history, because anyone who's come to Greenwich probably knows, it's a great museum. But it's quite focused on history and science, and I think there's sort of and art, obviously visual art, but there's something to be said about sort of literature and film and drama and so forth, and kind of bringing that to life. So it will be interesting to see, if once we break that down, how many of those visitors would have come anyway, and how many of them have just come to see it.
That business back just made me think of another question, which is, are Shakespeare's texts at all a source for maritime history and practice?
Well, this is, again, the question with the Falconer, sort of reading of that opening line of the opening scene in The Tempest. Yeah. I think there have been studies looking at asking seafarers and sailors to kind of look at the language and work out exactly what they're doing and whether or not what they're doing was ever going to work. But from what I've read, it seems quite ambiguous. Some people say, yes, this is perfectly correct, and other people sort of say, no, this is rubbish. So, yeah, I'm not sure.
Any more questions? Desperate to get off. Can I ask, how did the idea emerge? Who asked who to collaborate on this?
It was a bit of a perfect storm, to be fair, because the conference was already happening. And
so there were two things going on. We were thinking about how to celebrate, or what to do with the folio for 400. And obviously April 23rd, around about that day, was key, and obviously we've got the November date as well. So it's the Maritime Museum there. I actually wrote to the director and suggested we made the loan there. Partly because of the engagement, partly because I live in Greenwich. So the meetings were very, very, very close, but also because I do believe the placing an object in a different context, playing with it, if you like, in the most obviously secure way, but playing with it does illuminate it. And we're in charge of this thing. This document, it's got to be seen, and people want to see it, And as I said, putting in this, people always ask, well, why the Maritime Museum? Because it's nothing to do with Shakespeare. But actually, when you look at it, when you start talking about it or writing about it, it's everything to do with it. But similarly, I guess if you've got a copy and put it in the Natural History Museum or the Science Museum, it would bring out resonances. And I think that's what your project is doing as well. Bringing out resonances, allowing us to explore it, draw our own, a conclusion from it, whether we're an amateur, whether we're a scholar, whether we're a teacher, whether we're a theatre director, and enable us to engage with it in a new and very different way. So that's why I wrote. Yeah,
good.
It happened that the museum was around the corner.
Yeah, convenient. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
I think it really is a story of access, isn't it, Peter? We can't stress that enough, that when you have a document that, although it's seen by our own pupils at Dulwich College, and indeed by the kids of the Southern Schools Learning Partnership, so we've got 14 state schools we're partners with who come in, I hope during this period and afterwards will come in. If you can take something into a public space, which is therefore less forbidding, you are also taking that next step towards access. And I think that is almost our equivalent to the theatre company's public programme, taking things to people who do not easily feel they can come to you. But once they've seen it somewhere else, what's interesting, in a way we're following now with our Shakespearean, our Elenian archive, what we've already done with our Shackleton story. And Shackleton was an old boy at Dulwich, we have the James Kerr boat. Polar exploration is now on the Southwark Primary School curriculum because every child in Southwark can come into Dulwich College and touch. We love the fact that all our archives are touchable. We don't believe in that, keeping things around. So I love the story of the sniffling boys from sneezing on our First Folio. But it's that sense that what we're doing now with the First Folio is what we've already done with the James Kerr, which is make it so accessible. And if you're going to break down the Berlin Wall between what matters so much to me and to Peter is the state-independent school divide. The more points of contact and of touch that you can bring in, the better. So access to us is the keynote of what we're talking about.
For those who don't know, Dr. Spence is my boss.
He was the head of Dulwich, the master of Dulwich.
Thank you. Great. Oh, one more for Martin.
Do you hope in future years Shakespeare scholars will be tracing the snot marks on the dial?
Well, there are enough grease marks and candle spatters and wormholes to begin with. So perhaps adding a little bit of history. No, seriously, it is. I know we've joked about it, but it is well treated. It's well treated. And the one thing this exhibition has done as well, it's meant that the telltale has been rebound, which is a great thing that came out of this exhibition as well.
You are looking
we are absolutely looking after the documents while making them as accessible as possible.
That's fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lucy and Peter.